A $28,000 wheelchair is launched off a jetway and slams onto the tarmac, caught in a Miami viral clip seen nearly 2 million times. For the passenger, it isn't just equipment, it's her independence, now lying mangled as airport staff walk away. Outrage erupts across TikTok and X, but this was never just one mistake. Over 4 years, American Airlines mishandled more than 10,000 mobility devices, twice the failure rate of its rivals. What made the story explode this time, and why did it finally trigger a record-smashing federal penalty? To understand how wheelchair users ended up treated like luggage and what it will take to end it, let's go back to the moment the world could no longer look away. On a November afternoon at Miami International, a bystander's phone captured a moment that would ricochet across the internet. A ramp agent in an American Airlines vest rolled a custom power wheelchair worth $28,000 down the jet bridge. Without warning, the chair was shoved forward, tumbling off the end and crashing onto the concrete below. The passenger, left waiting at the gate, watched her independence vanish in seconds. The video spread with a force that numbers alone can't explain. 1.8 million views in 48 hours. The hashtag AA wheelchair trending on TikTok and X, and a flood of comments from people who recognize their own fears in that single jarring clip. For the woman at the center, this wasn't just lost property. Her chair was a lifeline, custom-built, fitted to her body, the difference between full participation and being stranded. In the aftermath, she was offered a manual loaner that didn't fit her needs. A 45-minute flight delay followed, but the real delay stretched much longer. Missed connections, $1,200 out of pocket for a rental, and weeks before a replacement arrived. She later told investigators, "It felt like being treated as a piece of luggage." Anger poured in from disability advocates, veterans groups, and strangers who understood that a wheelchair is not cargo. Senator Tammy Duckworth, who uses a wheelchair herself, described incidents like this as breaking their legs. The Department of Transportation took notice, referencing the Miami video as the most widely viewed evidence of unsafe handling in its history. The outrage didn't fade. Instead, it became a rallying point, a single act that forced the world to confront what had, for years, been dismissed as isolated mistakes. The story was no longer just about one passenger or one airport. It was about a pattern and a system that seemed built to fail the very people it claimed to serve. The Department of Transportation's investigation did not hinge on a single viral video. Over 5 years, the American Airlines transported more than 146,000 wheelchairs and scooters. Out of those, 10,298 were reported lost, damaged, or delayed, a mishandling rate of 2.02%. That number stands out sharply against the industry average of 1.38%. At Delta, the rate was just 0.83%. Spirit Airlines, an outlier, reached nearly 6%, but American's sheer volume made its failures impossible to ignore. The numbers kept rising. In 2022, internal safety audits at American flagged a 16% year-over-year increase in complaints, even as overall device volume grew by only 12%. DOT investigators sifted through email chains, compliance reports, and meeting minutes, finding repeated warnings and missed deadlines. The data pointed to something more than bad luck. On an average day in 2023, 31 mobility devices were mishandled across U.S. airlines, but American alone accounted for nearly 1/3 of all industry incidents. Behind the statistics stood voices demanding accountability. The Paralyzed Veterans of America, whose formal complaints helped trigger the federal probe, described the pattern as neglect that endangers veterans and civilians alike. DOT's own air travel consumer reports showed that year after year, American lagged behind major competitors, leaving thousands stranded or forced to use ill-fitting loaners. For passengers, the numbers were more than data points. They meant missed flights, lost independence, and the constant risk that a trip could end in disaster. The scale of the problem made outrage impossible to dismiss as overreaction. Secretary Pete Buttigieg put it bluntly, "The era of tolerating poor treatment of airline passengers with disabilities is over." For American Airlines, the numbers became a reckoning, one that would soon carry a price tag no airline had ever faced. Jane L. remembers the sound her chair made as it hit the concrete, a crack, then silence. The device that gave her freedom was custom-built for her body, valued at $28,000, and took months to fit. Insurance covered most of it, but not the cost of being stranded. For 3 days, she rented a power chair for $1,200, cobbling together receipts for a reimbursement process that stretched out for weeks. The loaner didn't fit. She missed her connection, her appointments, and her sense of safety in public spaces. In her words, it felt like being treated as a piece of luggage. Carlos M. traveled for work, relying on a $22,000 power scooter to get from meeting to meeting. In March 2024, his scooter was loaded upside down in Seattle, crushing the battery casing and leaving him unable to move. There was no loaner available at the airport. He missed a business presentation, lost 2 weeks of income, and paid $3,500 out of pocket for repairs before American Airlines offered a partial settlement. The real damage, he later said, was the fear that flying could cost him his independence at any moment. Maya S., a graduate student, checked her lightweight manual wheelchair for a flight from Boston to Los Angeles. It vanished into the system, surfacing 48 hours later in a different city. She rented a chair for $120 a day, missed classes, and spent days chasing paperwork. For Maya, the loss wasn't just financial. It was a reminder that travel always carried a risk of being left behind. Senator Tammy Duckworth, who uses a wheelchair herself, has called incidents like these breaking their legs. For every statistic, there is a story of a person forced to navigate airports without the equipment that makes daily life possible. The price tags are staggering: $10,000 to $50,000 for a power wheelchair, $3,500 for a single repair, hundreds more for rentals. But the real cost is measured in lost time, lost work, and lost dignity. As Duckworth put it, when an airline repeatedly fails to protect the most vulnerable travelers, Congress must ensure that enforcement is robust and that victims receive real compensation. On October 22, 2024, the Department of Transportation announced a penalty that stunned the airline industry. American Airlines would pay $50 million for its treatment of passengers who rely on wheelchairs and scooters, the largest disability-related fine in United States aviation history. The numbers alone set a new standard. The penalty is 25 times greater than any previous Department of Transportation enforcement for disability violations. The consent order splits the sum in two. Half, a $25 million cash payment, goes directly to the United States Treasury, scheduled in 3 installments over 3 years. The other half must be invested in accessibility improvements, with every dollar audited and tracked by federal officials. American cannot simply write a check and move on. The airline is required to spend $25 million on real upgrades, new equipment, hands-on staff training, and a system to compensate affected passengers. If American fails to meet these obligations, the investment credit converts into additional fines. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg made the stakes clear. The era of tolerating poor treatment of airline passengers with disabilities is over. His words echoed across newsrooms and advocacy groups. For decades, fines for mishandling mobility devices were measured in hundreds of thousands, sometimes a few million. The previous record was $2 million, set in 2018 against a small regional carrier. Now the government was sending a message, one that reached far beyond a single company. American Airlines responded the next day, stating, "We know we need to do better." In their official release, the airline framed the settlement as consistent with existing commitments, pointing to $175 million already spent on training, new equipment, and infrastructure. But the consent order does not allow for promises alone. Every investment must be documented, every improvement verified. The Department of Transportation will audit Americans' progress year after year. For the first time, the cost of mistreating disabled travelers was measured not just in broken devices and missed flights, but in a penalty that even a $50 billion company could not ignore. American Airlines moved fast to shape the narrative after the penalty hit the headlines. CEO Robert Isom's statement to the press was measured. American Airlines remains committed to providing safe, dignified travel for all passengers. We will invest $25 million in accessibility improvements and continue to refine our training programs. The company pointed to $175 million already spent on training, new equipment, and infrastructure, framing the consent order as an extension of efforts already underway. In their words, the settlement was consistent with existing commitments, but beneath the corporate language, the numbers tell a different story. American Airlines draws in more than $50 billion in annual revenue. The $50 million penalty, record-setting as it is, amounts to just a fraction of a percent, roughly 0.1% of a single year's income. For a company of this scale, the fine is less than a rounding error on a quarterly balance sheet. The cash payment to the U.S. Treasury will be split over 3 years, and the mandated $25 million in improvements can be credited against investments the airline was already planning to make. The consent order does not allow for empty promises. Every dollar spent on accessibility must be documented and audited by federal officials. American must submit annual reports to the Department of Transportation detailing progress on new equipment, staff training, and passenger compensation. If the airline misses its targets, the investment credit converts into additional fines. The government has insisted on receipts, not just reassurances. Even so, the company's public stance remains carefully optimistic. American's leadership emphasizes compliance and the scale of its investments while avoiding any admission of fault. The official line is clear. The airline knows it needs to do better, but insists that change is already in motion. For passengers still waiting for real improvements, the question remains, will this historic penalty force lasting reform, or is it simply the cost of doing business for an industry giant? Federal law has shaped every step of this story, turning outrage into enforceable rights. The AAR Carrier Access Act, passed in 1986, stands at the center. It bans discrimination against passengers with disabilities and requires airlines to provide safe, timely assistance and to treat mobility devices as essential medical equipment, not as cargo. For decades, enforcement was patchy. Complaints piled up, but penalties rarely made headlines. That changed with the Department of Transportation's authority under 49 U.S.C. Section 46301. This statute gives the DOT the power to levy civil penalties for violations of the ACAA and, crucially, lets them triple the fine when damage to a wheelchair or injury to a disabled passenger is involved. The rules grew sharper in recent years. In December 2022, Congress codified the Airline Passengers with Disabilities Bill of Rights, spelling out 10 core protections. Airlines must now provide prompt wheelchair assistance, supply comparable loaner devices at no cost if the original is lost or damaged, and publish quarterly data on disability-related complaints. But the most sweeping changes arrived in April 2024, when the DOT finalized a new rule that redefined what counts as a violation. Any loss, delay, or damage to a checked wheelchair or scooter is now treated as a per se violation of the ACAA. No more arguing over intent or fault. The rule also mandates annual hands-on training for every ramp agent and flight attendant, with refresher courses every 12 months. Airlines have to notify passengers of any incident within 30 minutes and provide a comparable loaner within 2 hours. Real-time tracking, often using RFID tags, is no longer optional. It's required. These legal changes explain why the penalty against American Airlines could reach $50 million. The consent order draws its force from these statutes and rules, holding the airline to a standard that is no longer just aspirational. For the first time, the law treats a damaged wheelchair as a clear breach of civil rights, not just an unfortunate accident. The system that once let mishandling go unpunished now has teeth and the full weight of federal enforcement behind it. Every day in the United States, airlines mishandle an average of 31 wheelchairs or scooters. That is more than 7,600 incidents in just the first 8 months of 2023, numbers that stretch far beyond any one airline or airport. American Airlines drew headlines for its failures, but the problem runs throughout the industry. Delta, often praised for its disability services, reported a mishandling rate of 0.83%, while United's rate stood at 1.06%. Spirit Airlines, at nearly 6%, had the worst record among major carriers. The industry average, according to the Department of Transportation's Air Travel Consumer Reports, hovered at 1.38% in 2023. These are not just technical glitches or rare mistakes. Mobility devices are more than twice as likely to be damaged, lost, or delayed as regular checked baggage. For passengers who rely on wheelchairs, the risk is constant, no matter which airline they choose. The numbers reveal a pattern. Across the country, thousands of travelers each year are forced to gamble with their independence every time they fly. Every wheelchair loaded onto a plane faces a simple, stubborn flaw. Aircraft cargo holds were never designed for the size, weight, or fragility of modern mobility devices. Airlines rely on improvised straps and foam cradles meant for baggage, not for equipment that can cost as much as a new car and is custom fitted to a person's body. The result is a system where damage is not just possible, it is almost predictable. Engineers have known this for years. The Aviation Safety Institute tested a prototype called the Zero Impact Securement Bracket, a lightweight frame that bolts directly to the floor of a 737. In trials, it cut wheelchair damage by 97% during simulated turbulence and rough landings. Aircraft manufacturers have endorsed the design, offering technical support and discounted retrofit packages to carriers. But progress has stalled. Airlines for America, the industry's main trade group, has pushed the Department of Transportation to delay any mandatory rollout until at least 2027, arguing that retrofitting fleets is too expensive and unproven at scale. Meanwhile, advocacy groups and disability lawyers have filed lawsuits demanding immediate action, calling the current system a violation of civil rights. The gap between what is possible and what is required keeps growing, with thousands of passengers caught in the middle. Federal oversight did not end with the headlines. In the year after the penalty, the Department of Transportation kept American Airlines under a microscope. The airline's mishandling rate dropped from 2.02% to 1.77%, but that still meant more than 1 in 50 mobility devices was lost, delayed, or damaged, far above the best-performing carriers. The consent order gave the DOT real teeth. If American misses its required milestones, the airline faces up to $10 million in extra penalties for each violation. Every promised investment must be documented, every new training session tracked. In January 2025, the DOT put American on a compliance watch list, warning that the agency would audit progress and could escalate enforcement if standards slipped. Advocacy groups refused to let up. The Paralyzed Veterans of America, whose complaints helped spark the investigation, made their position clear. This settlement is a step, but we will keep pressure on the airline to fully implement the required changes. The watchdog role now falls as much to these advocates as to the government. With the 2025 audit on the horizon, American Airlines knows that the story is not finished. The fine set a new record, but whether it will deliver true change or simply become another cost of doing business remains an open question. Today, 1 in every 100 wheelchairs checked in U.S. airports still risk damage, a statistic that means independence lost, not just property harmed. The $50 million penalty signals a warning, but for the millions who depend on these devices, being treated as cargo remains daily reality. True dignity in air travel cannot be measured in fines. The era of excuses is over. Now comes the test of real change. Share your thoughts below.